James was just mopping. No weapon, no threat, but to two white cops he was suspicious because he was black. They didn't need a reason, just his skin, and the cuffs snapped tight like a sentence without trial. They thought they bagged a janitor, but they just laid hands on a federal informant. Think this was just a mistake? Stick around till the end and watch the FBI tear down an entire precinct's standard procedure. James Tucker, his brown skin glistening with perspiration under the flickering fluorescent lights, swept the mop across the linoleum floor of Ray's diner with a practiced rhythm. Just another night shift for James, a black man navigating an unassuming janitorial role in a town where prejudice thrummed incessantly beneath the surface. But in America today, simply working a blue-collar job while black is enough to become a target of suspicion and brutality. The lingering stares of the two officers sipping coffee at the counter turned sharp, their eyes narrowing as they whispered a misjudgment. Their hushed conversation was laden with the misperception that James was someone to watch, to caution against, a newcomer who conveniently matched a vague description. Yet, behind James's quiet exterior lay a formidable history he wore like an invisible armor, whose existence was unknown to his uninformed observers. He was far more than they would ever imagine. What they failed to see could shift the ground they stood upon. It was only a matter of time. Would this encounter rewrite James's fate, or would he become just another silent tale of racial injustice? Comment where you're watching from and reflect on justice within your community. The two officers, Thompson and Rafferty, polished off their coffee, the rattling cups echoing a brewing sense of misconduct. They beckoned to the cashier, exchanging inconsequential pleasantries, their eyes flitting nervously back to James. Ignorance colored their judgment as much as prejudice did, each masking the potential questions that could have led to understanding, rather than what was to follow. "Look," Rafferty said, nudging Thompson. "He's smoothing the same spot over and over. Exactly like he's trying to keep low." "Yeah," Thompson replied, more as a formality than conviction. His hands moved to his holster with a mechanical reflex, steady eyes fixed on a man who seemed too engrossed in his work to note his erstwhile danger. At that moment, James edged the mop slowly towards his cart, knots of thoughts impeding his progress. He knew ignorance when he saw it, sensed the cloud of preconceived danger hanging over the officers, and intimidation framed by his skin color. And yet, his only offense was tending to a task as mundane as mopping. "Hey, you! Stop there!" Rafferty called out, taking a step closer while sharing a glance with Thompson that said, "We've got this." The glint of their badges under the lights shone preemptively, as though asserting presumed authority. James paused, the stick of the mop still in his grip. A flash of nerves flared through him, though he steadied himself with a deep breath. Inside, he weighed his responses, knowing full well the cost of a misplaced word or glance, the price for a misunderstanding that could swiftly turn malevolent. "Yes, officers?" James asked, tone measured, eyes unwavering. He bore the expectation of their inquiry with an unsettling familiarity, a recurring theme in his life. "You're fitting a description," Thompson explained, his voice wrapped in an assumption that lagged behind reason but preceded any fact-checking process. "We just need you to come down to the station, clear a few things up." James's heart thudded dully within his chest, but his expression, a mask crafted through years of encounters like this, remained neutral, impervious. "I'm just cleaning here. Got your man mixed up." Yet instincts told him argument equaled provocation. He dropped the mop, hoping the cue might raise Thompson's curiosity above suspicion. "Come on, just do as told," Rafferty insisted, deliberately toning down to feigned congeniality. "You can explain there." With a resigned nod, James allowed himself to be led away. Silence closed in on the trio, only punctuated by the jingle of the bell affixed to the diner's glass door as they stepped into the night, a departure echoing unease more than resolve. As they reached the squad car parked outside, Rafferty took the lead. "Hands behind your back," he ordered, cuffs ready, leaving room for minimal argument. "What happened?" "I'm not resisting," James mumbled. Compliance is best armor. But his submission seemed to fuel Rafferty's latent authority, and the metal tightened around his wrists with a click both men knew too well, the soundtrack of injustice creeping beneath civility. Seated in the back of the car, separated by the unspoken boundaries their world had built, James stared at the backs of the officers' heads, feeling the weight of walls closing in. The air inside thickened with implications too numerous to vocalize. This arrest, a simple misjudgment to the officers bred of ingrained notions, wasn't a new scene for James, but a recurring one that in another time, another country, might end without home. The officers lacked context amid their prejudged script. To them, he was just another person, silently taking the fall, a character they believed fit the crime, not a man with strength drawn from quiet resilience and stories too profound to disclose at such a time. As the car moved towards the station, its red and blue lights slicing through the anonymity of a night too quiet for comfort, James closed his eyes. Behind those lids rested the weapon words could not deploy, evidence still hidden in his favor, and something more, an unwavering belief in justice. In the station ahead, precinct routines commenced, unaware of the seismic shift about to ripple through the system, a truth James alone held, quietly waiting for its moment to change everything. The station house buzzed with its own kind of life, fluorescent lights glaring off surfaces sterilized and indifferent. James was led in through the main doors, each step delayed by the weight of unseen chains snaking through the linoleum tiles, trapping him in their systemic embrace. Officer Thompson glanced at James before gesturing him towards a wooden bench, stained with stories of confinement and deferred dreams. Clerks and officers moved languidly around them, clutching files that piled higher than their belief in change. An unyielding machine they maintained, oiled by the outcomes of arrests like James's. "Take a seat," Rafferty ordered with practiced politeness that barely grazed over the casual essence of authority, pointing towards the bench. James complied, the cuffs biting into his wrists, a constant reminder of misconstrued symbols. Nearby, a rookie cop named Alex watched with an intrinsic discomfort in his eyes. The precinct was his first assignment, a place he ventured into with ideals that were already being tested. He could see it, a man precisely fitting a mistaken label, but beneath whose surface lay layers yet undisclosed by either side. The procedure began. Questions James answered calmly. Name, occupation, and any other thing they desired to confirm with impatience rather than accuracy. Officer Schultz tapped keys at her desk, imprinting perpetuity in systems both digital and prejudiced. "Okay, James," Thompson leaned over the desk. "Mind telling us what you were doing back there?" James maintained his composure, a stoic exterior wrapped around seething frustration. How easy it would be to unravel the entire setup with a few well-placed truths. Yet now wasn't the place. Timing was everything. "I was mopping as they pay me to do," James said. "Been there nearly every night, but suppose that's news to you, being new and all?" Thompson frowned, a defensive cloud settling over his brow. "Description checks out. We have to follow protocol." "Protocols error, occasionally," James countered, his voice collected. "What happens when they do?" His question hung in the air, unanswered, a truth too keenly avoided. Alex watched nearby. There was the question, riveting in its simplicity yet colossal in the undoing of belief it offered. The rookie had heard whispers of past errors, of lives disrupted by protocols that protected some at the expense of others, a cycle James seemed painfully familiar with. Yet Alex hesitated, the scales of consequence balancing nervously in his mind. To speak now might mean defiance. To remain silent, complicity. Rafferty joined, interrupting the fledgling tension. "Right. We'll check this all out, make sure everything aligns." James nodded slightly, a contained nod, knowing that definitions of alignment undulated with so much unspoken bias within these walls. As logistics played out, the inadequacy of it struck Alex repeatedly. Would now be a time to question, to perhaps lift up a voice against a small, unbecoming portrayal that might grow into entire life being sidelined? Or would it simply, to redefine safety in its own distorted guise, be silenced again? Around him, the machinery ground forward. Paperwork shuffled through assembly lines like mechanical gestures, filing the existence of someone presumed forgotten in a moment. Each line forecasted roles they wished someone like James would conform to neatly, instead of challenging, derailing their seamless operations. A soft yet pronounced hum from the small radio on the desk played in contrast to the burgeoning silence burdening Alex's thoughts. Could he begin a new beat in sync with something fairer, or overlook what sang transparently around him? As James waited for the system to sift through the misinformation, life outside pulsed unknowingly. Individuals hustled by without glancing in, citizens engaged in their own dialogues on a larger scale, unaware of the microcosm that was betraying justice behind closed precinct doors. Realization seeped through Alex's hesitation like osmosis. What they perceived versus what they understood opened gashes wide enough for truth to crash through. To rectify now, going beyond uniforms to simple humanity needed more than introspection. Meanwhile, within the moments still held captive to institutional procedures, James sat, his outward calm never betraying the storm within. Experience had taught him to recognize the unraveling nor'easters flitting through subtleties. His every word an anchor, ever fated for truth's unveiling as successive seconds ticked toward an inevitable exposure. In the backdrop of such orchestrated chaos, a discordant soundtrack loomed in preparation, a chord of justice that neither uniform nor bias could mute when the time came. And James knew, in this quiet, there lay power, a phase before the eye of the storm, just beyond what they comprehended. The precinct seemed to hold its breath, anticipation hanging thick in the air, when the phone rang, a sharp, authoritative trill that pierced through the routine noise. Officer Schultz answered, her expression shifting from bored detachment to keen interest, eyebrows knitting together as she listened. Her eyes flicked towards James, a new wariness in her gaze. She transferred the call to Captain Warner, a man whose presence carried the gravitas of years spent navigating both justice and the tangles of its misapplication. He leaned back as he listened, absorbing the commanding voice on the other end, shadowing the room with attention only Warner seemed to conceive. "What do you need me to do?" Warner asked, every syllable enunciated with the cautious weight that came from gravitating around authority levels he respected. He watched the officers around him, their shifting frowns mirroring the unease residing just below his own calm exterior. The caller's voice was low but assertive, each word smooth yet formidable. "Captain Warner, I represent the interests of an individual currently being held in your custody, James Tucker. You may want to reconsider the immediate future of this matter, given the circumstances that are broader than your immediate understanding. I suggest you release him." Captain Warner's eyes narrowed, the words resonating ominous as they permeated the room. He scanned the criminal sheet, of sky, the proverbial expanse, that often cast doubt on permitting such liberties its place. "You need to explain why this is relevant," Warner urged, his voice becoming strained, with its increasing fiscal demands hushing priority. The reply over the line was measured and clear. "James Tucker is not an ordinary detainee. He may appear as a janitor in your records, but he's far from it. Mr. Tucker is a key witness in a federal investigation. You're holding him mistakenly, and his associations could soon redirect attention towards your station if mishandled. We'll have eyes and actions in place faster than you predict, Captain." Warner frowned, momentarily disoriented, yet intently attuned. The veil of James's unassuming demeanor swiftly tore under neoteric revelations. Here was not a simple case of mistaken identity, but a palette of much deeper, richer hues. "I understand. Warner replied tersely, sliding a glance at Officer Thompson still stationed near James. "Give us a moment." As he replaced the receiver, Captain Warner motioned for Thompson to join the fold, eyeing Rafferty in tandem. They shared a quick consultation, rapid-fire murmurs cloaked in disbelief, circling around protocols and the surprising depths revealed by just one call. Thompson's skepticism eventually faltered into pragmatism, albeit reluctantly. "Do we let him go, Captain?" His voice not quite carrying the challenge his posture inadvertently fronted. Warner held a reluctance about him, weighing potential ridicule against larger shadows of oversight looming. His years at the station had hardly prepared him for federal ripples, demanding swift compliance and a rare specter of humility before higher jurisdictions. "Yes," Warner nodded finally, making a resolute decision amidst swirling thoughts. "But let's ease into this without making waves. We need confirmation, as they may call again." The atmosphere within the station grew denser. A tether of contained excitement and grudging obedience permeated uniformly among them, echoing throughout like an unrehearsed overture ahead of impending drama. Unbeknownst to those occupying blue uniformity, allocating steps resumed towards a public conversation beyond their thresholds. Like smoke carried through the timorous gaps in societal walls was a plea for awareness, leading stubbornly ahead of judiciary constraints. James sat with profound patience, watching chirpy dialogues continue, his essence grounded stoically, understanding the unveiling above him, its direct divergence raising strategies he kept close to heart. Going beyond moments yet tangled innocuously in threadbare reasoning, he gave Warner a silent nod, one recognizing the bigger symphony playing so passionately beyond legacy-laden calls. The gentle persuasion he emanated suggested he was expectant but ready when called upon, coherent in all the ways society was about to comprehend anew. An arrival of Truth's allies, unanticipated forces now approaching to meld the matters their superiors regarded at length awaited outside. Soon, multitudes before unseen walls were introduced to the unlikeliest of matters within, proving resilience wasn't merely about survival, but heralding unseen power finding its moment. The precinct's entrance swung open to reveal Melanie Rourke, a public defense lawyer whose reputation had been wrought in the fires of fierce court battles. Her steely gaze swept the room, assessing, calculating, a shark in clear waters filled with minnows. Mel was there to fight, and everyone knew it. "Good afternoon, everyone," she announced, voice carrying the subtle strength of a gavel strike. Her presence shifted the room's energy, a chessboard in play with every piece left vulnerable to a calculated advance. Officer Thompson stood, his authority questioned, but the mere presence of power now residing in Mel startled him as he tried exhibiting control over the scene. Thompson's eyes shifted nervously from Mel to Captain Warner, hoping for direction. "I'm here for my client, James Tucker," Mel stated, dropping a dossier heavily marked with tabs onto the nearby desk. It thudded with a deliberately intense finality. The term wrongfully detained might ring more than a few bells once we delve into specifics. Captain Warner emerged from his office, retaining the placid waters of a man practiced in crisis aversion, though he felt the undercurrents tugging firmly beneath him. His voice held a patience parched of certainty. "Ms. Rourke, we're verifying a few details concerning his situation. Verification, ample as it is, Captain, does not usually require indefinite detainment," Mel replied cordially, though beneath her words lay a compelling challenge. "You arrested an innocent man. Now you discern whether to cut your losses before this becomes an ordeal for all involved. James is a key witness in a very public, very high-stakes federal investigation, and that alone should have been your first clue." Warner hesitated. He was a man accustomed to giving resolve in dealing with local disturbances, not being fenced in by federal webworks and their cascading implications. "Understood, but we received a call, unexpected layers, if you will. We're assessing how best to resolve." Mel's laugh was oddly light for the commanding presence she projected. an admittance of dramatic irony that Warner could not understand. "What you have, Captain, is not a dilemma, but a burgeoning story nearing national attention, one that calls for your swift and indeed deliberative measures. Allow my client's release now, and perhaps we can rectify this before it ripples over into the newsfeed." As Mel spoke, beyond the precinct's concrete dinge, a low murmur began swelling, a sound growing from a flicker to a flame. The public had begun to take notice, whispers filtering outward into a community gasping for transparency where once only shadows lay. Locals, slowly amassing outside, pressed closer. The air tingled with anticipation, the steadfast vigil of those who suspected their assumptions would prove justified. James watched from his seat, eyes fixed on Mel. Her words were crafted with precision, cornering missteps, shedding light into murked corners he had witnessed too often. The ignition of public sentiment outside began seeping into the sterile architecture around him, becoming fuel for the fervor Mel incited with calculated strikes. Warner turned to Officer Schultz, her fingers poised above the keyboard, documents fluttering under the transposing breeze of assured discretion. He dismissed her doubt with a curt nod, a reluctant acceptance enveloping the air, stagnating below their preconceived successions. Aware of the interrogation outside burying fortunes within default veneers, Warner nodded begrudgingly. "Release Mr. Tucker. Immediately." Mel smiled, charisma implied in a shift of her stature. The battle never seemed lost nor won, merely transitioned as she anticipated the strategic reformation yet to arise. As Schultz tapped into the digital realms, relinquishing all previous commands bound by mistakes of the past, the precinct's hum, often masked by its buzzing monotony, seemed considerably more volatile, carrying whispered promises of change. James's wrists were released, the cuffs clattering onto the desk with a resonance that buried history within sound. The room exhaled in tandem, a collective breath, withheld now, freed, but only momentarily. "Thank you." James met Mel's gaze, his gratitude unspoken, veiled inside his assurance, touched by the lengths apparatuses beyond himself had ventured for justice. For him, the stakes had transformed, federal secrets opening to advocate truths. Outside, under an intact sky battling fervor with courtesy, voices crescendoed unseen by those still within. Their presence urged forth, flowing around James's path towards promise, tempered by a lawyer cloistered with the conviction, as undeterred as any seismic force, felt coherent to bridge justice impacting life. With banners ripe with expectancy, the community pulled their corners tighter to cloak him not just in protection, but in the victory of dissonant voices harmonizing against injustice. James emerged, flanked by Mel, a vision, seizing both quiet and revolution witnessed within the seconds crossing thresholds. The precinct's environment lingered in a tightrope balance as James and Mel made their exit. Eyes followed them not just as witnesses, but as speculators of the unscripted drama unraveling before them. As calm returned temporarily to its structured haunt, the next act unfolded with an unforeseen fervor. The FBI's arrival was neither quiet nor subtle. Black SUVs pulled to a decisive halt outside the station, the rhythm of feet disembarking into a united front reverberating through the precinct's physical confines yet ideologically siloed identity. Agents clad in dark suits, wearing badges of consequence only whispered of, made their presence known with a purposeful stride, akin to resolute thunder on a cloudless day. Inside, Captain Warner shifted uneasily, his demeanor tinged with expectation and uncertainty hiding amid certainty's fragments. He glanced towards the entrance as Agent Marcus Slater led the march inward, an energy both visible and intimidating. The room's already precarious tension thickened to a near-tangible density. "Captain Warner," Agent Slater hailed. His tone was cordial, yet imbued with authority. a balance he masterfully maintained through a career of legal dances. Special Agent Marcus Slater, we're here to debrief and secure Mr. Tucker. The captain nodded in recognition, a choir of questions brushing his lips only to recede unspoken. Certainly, Agent Slater. I believe Mr. Tucker is just leaving the premises? Then we made it just in time, Slater replied, his eyes scanning beyond Warner's shoulder where James lingered in conversation with Mel, both feet apart from the entrenchment yet within proximity all the same. Mr. Tucker has information imperative to a case currently advancing courtesy of your oversight in wrongfully arresting him. James looked up, a weighty acknowledgement passing between him and Slater. An unspoken accord tethered by the challenges and negotiations now naturally pivoting in his narrative. Slater's knowledge and obligation stretch head within the facets of their trust, glistened in their shared acknowledgement, more than the precinct could forge an imprint. We'll need to take Mr. Tucker to a secure location, Agent Slater continued, his words underscored by the hushed acknowledgement imparted through protocols. Side glances were shot across the room, bouncing like tiny pebbles sent ricocheting through calm water. I'll come along, Mel interjected firmly, asserting herself with the resolute autonomy she had carved through her own passage of grit. James is under my advisement, and he'll have adequate representation with him at all times. Fair enough, Slater agreed, nodding without hesitation, a reflection of his capacity to recognize strength in alliance and the necessity of reclaiming integrity despite sustained stories beyond the precinct walls. As the trio moved to transition outside into awaiting vehicles geared with intent and certainty of purpose, the station returned to relative equilibrium, yet undercurrents of something unmistakably awakened now swirled. Officers exchanged wary glances amidst the clearing charge of adrenaline, a contemplation unvoiced, but collectively perceived, an awareness that change, resistant yet unmistakably present, threaded through the precinct's procedural tightening. Once outside, the assembled crowd embraced James with waves of upsurging support, now seeming monumental and unyielding. Cameras captured, recorded, uncertain and assured public whispers transcended from murmur to anthem, proving voices silenced by architectural grace could harmonize greater than previously unleashed. James, Mel, and Agent Slater moved past the crowd, their steps finding congruency, echoing beyond their limited sphere of relevance on this unfolding tapestry. A legacy, imprinting future ideals wound tightly within the current script, altered by present horizons. As the SUV doors closed, shielding the forward movement inside, James cast one final glance at the precinct, now tightening into its previous identity, but informed by new arrays, a far more present recollection, turning the engine of systematic change. Agent Slater commenced the journey, the path winding not just down asphalt corridors, but realms beyond understanding that excluded the sole privilege once preceding them. Yet with veranda-like clarity, hope veered unchecked through roads that lay wide open ahead, beckoning at destiny's helm. Within this vehicle of consequence and secrets, a story commanded its own truth, unfurling within its interior balance. Behind tinted shields, pretenses unfolded equally clear, as within, grand movement something stirring awakened not merely a journey of compliance, but a vibrancy gestating action anew in its clarion call, the name of justice finding its echo deep in the transcript of fractured pasts turned abundant. The SUV zipped smoothly through the tangled webwork of streets, the city's lights blurring into streaks of amber and white as they raced towards potential resolution and away from the distortions of conjecture. Inside, Agent Slater keyed in confidential information into a secure tablet, the only sounds accompanying the subdued hum of the engine being fingers tapping decisively on the screen. The agent's presence surrounding James felt like both protection and restraint, liminal entities ensuring passage through uncharted conversations with federal significance yet to unfold definitively. The implications of his role were thick in the air, not unlike the sense of anticipation clinging to them all, rooted in what awaited at their eventual destination. James, Agent Slater began without preamble as they crossed an intersection that vibrated with nocturnal life. "I know you understand the gravity of your position. What you've seen, what you know, it could tip the scales more than anything we've encountered lately." James nodded without the thematic resignation typically anticipated, acknowledging leadership within this structured confinement of both allegiance and responsibility. "I'm aware, Agent Slater, but knowing and acting on that knowledge aren't always synonymous, you know? Especially considering how everything unfolded today," James replied. His eyes met Slater's in the mirror. In that gaze existed the quiet uncertainty fluctuating between alarm and liberation, unpinned, yet firm within the expansive reality surrounding him. "In a way, this is more than you bargained for, isn't it?" Slater's acknowledgement was subtle, but resonated with mutual understanding. On most days, much like today, recognition had a way of shifting gears. Aesthetics did not easily comprehend, clarity veiling what lay beneath surface reflections. Mel set her pen down, ever the thorough executor anchoring dialogue with intentions of clarity. "James understands the situation he's in and his part in the chain. Tell us, what exactly would your outcome entail?" "His role shouldn't be reduced to just information, Agent Slater. Mr. Tucker offers more than just another tick in your checklist." Slater respected Mel's outburst, smothering resentment with admirable professionalism. "We need your testimony, James. The kind that could pivot other witnesses, you know, address influences before silence ensues." James leaned back, considering the mixture of conviction and complication cast before his trust-drained bearing. "Conflicted though I might be, selective unity doesn't get to define justice, does it? We brought a system into play. Oversight's just bound to get checked when opposing narratives are bound to clash." Mel smiled faintly, approving the tenacity rooted in James that made their string of events, from invisible maneuvers to documented pledge, lock magnitude around futures tethered forcefully by reality, yet embraced by inherent truths, winding everything unspoken. The car wove through the city's arteries, approaching inevitable checkpoints simultaneously static and unstoppable for those invested in records power chose to decipher, empowering mandates tuned beyond glances measured by faith. Even as Slater returned his focus to the quietly vibrating world housed in codes reporting James's operation days away in a framework decided, the seams began to glue possibilities together, stronger and more resolute than mere evanescence. "There's safety and transparency, isn't there?" James's question came with resonance, drawn from deeply buried colloquies. Thriving below disclosures heard yet unabsorbed, not just surviving challenge, but surpassing fullest expression. "Yes," Slater confirmed, a definite answer free from ambiguity, deeply interspersed within the current tides carving transformation. "For now, know that credibility matures as time allows." The city shrank behind them as the SUV slipped onto a road less traveled by the masses, yet pivotal for the chosen bearings they steered strategically through, readying tides pressurizing their circumstantial stewards for impact, imminent across a story hastening to completion. Every mile marker urged them closer to revelations, soon manifesting through conversations started yet to rend conjectures. Every shadow inside the vehicle traced James's silhouette, illuminating a paradox realized within dimensions no longer compact, but broadening, nascent in kind, as awareness circled overtaking truth. Open to articulating the tribunal change demanded, with assurance Slater began bridging the gap, less visible but tangible in collective reality, truth gathering its forces within identities traded through every transit, each soul carried towards an anticipatory unraveling, told fervently in its newly perceived crescendo. The precinct walls, now a distant memory, had once echoed with rigid certainties that seemed increasingly illusory against the backdrop of federal intervention. Back within this pivotal echo chamber, Captain Warner and his officers felt the ripples extending from James's departure, the tidings of accountability forcing introspection within their until now unchallenged precinct customs. Inside the precinct, Officer Thompson paced near his desk, his actions a silent complaint against the encroaching reality of potential repercussions. Rafferty sat slumped in a chair, scratching notes onto a pad, the action more an attempt to distract himself from the uncertainty pooling in swirling layers around them both. Their superiors knew what others doubted. With the FBI intrusion came more than just temporary oversight, but a catalyst pressing against old habits, aiming for transformation where stasis had comfortably rested. As the funeral pace of realization took root, the air grew tense with the musings of consequence yet to unravel through departmental corridors. In another corner, Officer Alex scanned the precinct's often crowded boundaries, now seemingly more serrated, caught amidst the directive mandate only hinted at previously. The rookie sought guidance in frames he thought secure, now overtaken by stories that once avoided his orbit with quiet resignation. Officers mulled in fragmented clusters, the air abuzz with murmured conjecture, the closeness akin to the unearthly before a challenging genesis. If not in speech, certainly the unknown rippled through expressions previously reading as confidence consolidated, now tracing nervously over narratives they inadvertently tangled themselves within. Captain Warner strode through the precinct's open space, authority underlined with the necessity of directive associations. His authority, a fixture, now threaded with uncertainty, as systemic reverberations trafficked through identities both above and below badges. "Listen up," he announced, expression melding stern determination with pragmatic resolve. "This isn't just procedural oversight anymore. There's institutional surveillance we have to account for. Agent Slater is conducting necessary interviews, illuminating parts of our framework." A murmur rippled through the gathered officers, expressions bland yet internally casing a myriad of emotions, welding worlds newly awakened, but still shorn to tradition's edges. Rafferty spoke up, voice steady despite its tension. "Are we now under their scrutiny, just for trying to uphold our protocols?" The captain, while inscrutable in his public stance, read nuance beneath established lines of inquiry. "There's more at stake than any of us envisioned. Our processes need adjustment, gentlemen, be it policy or perspective." Alex absorbed the practiced veneer of Captain Warner's tone, noting the shifting face of public service, now reoriented with dimensions neither static nor singular as previously understood. He exchanged a glance with Schultz, both perceiving the jagged seams where thought and practice strained raw against preconception, no longer sufficient in post-procedural compliance. Warner continued, his discourse woven with inklings of change, authorized by institutional hierarchies many ignored in unwritten custom. "We need transparency, teamwork, and fair outcomes, irrespective of individual biases. The department is planning deeper audits. Any trace of misconduct has to dissolve." Thus emerged the lull between calls for accountability and silent concessions, where officers wrestled in fogs of personal shadows cast expansively around them, slowly re-examining folds of understanding uninvitedly summoned. Compelled by undertones seized from outside mediums and his own insulated reflections, Alex felt strides gathering under veracity, where systemic changes permeated strategy, fabric fibers observing transformation barely begun. As fluorescent brilliance cast shadows, then gathered them again in constant reform, Alex resolved to dismantle barriers between assumed nonchalance and compelled advocacy, mending concepts where disparate voices could inhabit valid accordances. Within such tightly cradled chambers, now awaiting elucidation, bureaucratic discipline wove fresher assertions. Honest debate flourished from sidelined whispers to multiple dividends extracted just behind, leading beyond previously held confinements. Captain Warner's yet unacknowledged retreat nonetheless bore with it unspun candor's imprint, touched by canvases broadening beyond immediate space, prompting paths unfurling expectations that others occupied, paving paths towards reconciliation yet to conclude formidably within their soothing trajectories. The unseen flux continued, prism-bound futures swelling toward nascent emergence, eventually overtaking the unwaveringly steadfast, now shifting slightly towards progression anew. As whispers of accountability spread like wildfire, outside the precinct energy simmered in anticipation. What started as a few murmurs among neighbors had grown into a congregation that swelled with conviction and indignation. An air of defiance fueled the gathering storm, the community rallying not just for James, but for every voice that had been drowned under systemic tides. The figures amassed outside the building were no longer just individuals. They were a multitude, a living, breathing tapestry of diverse lives, woven together by strands of shared struggle and common hope. Placards, painted with urgent phrases, bobbed like buoys in a choppy sea of faces. Their messages charged the air with demands for reform, transparency, and accountability that had long seemed out of reach. Emily Sanchez, a local activist known for her relentless advocacy, stood at the forefront, her eyes scanning the crowd. She exuded a presence that was both calming and galvanizing. Emily's words often carried weight not because they boomed, but because they resonated, delivered with a kind of benevolent ferocity that emboldened others to echo her call. "Listen up, folks," Emily beckoned, her voice rising over the crowd, compelling attention through a subtle force that commanded respect. "We're not here just for James Tucker. We are here for everyone who's ever been treated like his story doesn't matter." There was a collective cheer, but underneath it simmered a quiet, buzzed intensity. The crowd vibrated with the legacy of diverse injustices faced by a multitude made individual only through their shared confrontation with systemic neglect. In the midst of the gathering, Marlon Harris, a school teacher with personal stakes in this unfolding narrative, felt a knot in his chest tighten with each chant. His students, many of whom spoke about parents or relatives facing similar injustices, propelled his own stake in the collective pool of resistance. Unlike days spent shaping young minds, today grappled differently against a tide aiming not towards new knowledge but audibility, carving spaces that demanded fullness in societal conditions. As the chants surged, dynamic among the constant swell of raised voices, so too did the cameras of media personnel, drawn in by burgeoning spectacle. Reporters dispatched to cover yet another protest couldn't help but be captivated by the authentic urgency pervading the scene. Compelled by the prevailing sentiment as it permeated the night, tension within the precinct spilled into the street, its spillover effect casting a shadow across those who stood defiantly before systems unimaginable in their complexity, barring transparent discourse with stiff determination. Captain Warner watched from a window, the transparency of glass offering a clearer view than ever, the town's heart laid bare, pulsating with a mixture of anger, hope, and unabashed resistance. The wall between authority and community seemed weaker, threatened by the burgeoning calls for systemic re-evaluation. Inside, officers too listened, the echoes penetrating minds previously distant from affective cries. Officer Alex stood, galvanized by voices he had only dared briefly align himself with, contemplating methods of transforming duty into service, echoing justice, not control. Back outside, Emily's speech crescendoed, her voice a rallying cry in the calm before potential political unraveling. "We're part of something much bigger," she intoned, offering clarity in her stark vision. "We need to ensure every James, every Marlon, every unknown face sees justice, not just as an aspiration, but reality." Marlon nodded, the belief he vested in ideals not archaic, but reimagined with relevance and inclusivity, domesticated by Emily and shared within himself, now spread across everyone gathered. Whispers from further away collected into distinct syllables, shared, expanding the narrative within those enraptured within hope's collective embrace, united by function against dissonance, hidden only to reveal fierce dedication, crafted over candor itself. Solidarity, anticipated, marked renewal. Individuals striving towards communication, surpassed just within arranged guidelines, were finally reached anew, gathering proximate transcendence accompanied via sound courageous enough in its ignorant facade to challenge the historic. Collectively, Deeply, more than simple chants amid airwaves to gather, stood a movement clasped within comprehension, marching ever onward, mended to unsheltered disparity, determined to dissolve chaos yet stated, fortifying transitions, transforming iterations within, organically committed revelation. Inside, rounds of assessment began, calcifying towards new intentions. The precinct faded into realms over confession, more than manifestation-centered discourse, where resounds took form, no longer dwelt within fracture, but adhesion, assimilation pulsating underfoot, awaiting free ascension, sprung to action. As chants and cries fermented along the exterior pulse of the precinct, within walls barely separating sound from persistent hope, the air grew heavier still, weighed down by anticipation and an unyielding drive towards accountability. It was an atmosphere rife with both tension and possibility, where stories unsaid but keenly felt began surfacing, to meet light finally within reach. The turning point arrived amidst these echoes, carried by digits instead of words. A sudden notification pinged its grating demand for attention across screens in the officer's common area. Even reluctant eyes turned toward its source as a video began to play, a raw, unfiltered capture of events that, moments ago, existed solely within the insular boundaries of uncertain testimony. It showed James's arrest, stark against dull-lit streets, the perspective gritty, the sound clear and condemning. Each image rolled on unimpeded, unflinchingly capturing the indifference laced into authorities' actions, now placed on unyielding display. To James, who watched from the confines of an SUV mere blocks away, the footage was familiar territory, yet unfurled anew. He knew this unseen lens documented what his words alone had fought to articulate, now aligning each frame against incredulous denials birthed within precinct walls. It was a revelation that hammered truth in far more vivid imagery than could have been sculpted by discourse alone. Others took in the video, a juxtaposition to entrenched routines daily unspooled, and it was impossible without confrontation. Officer Alex felt a profound shift freezing through him, a fault line laid bare that obligingly demanded amendment over silence, defying truth not through incessant testament, but through coverage undisguised, immutable over interpretation. The response among officers was a spectrum of quicksilver realizations. For some, indignation colored their cheeks, a defense of actions clinging to rigid adherence to duty unchallenged till now. Others stood empty of responses, even as internal assessments began moving gears painstakingly toward rebirth of understanding. Captain Warner, faced with undeniable evidence coalescing with familiar tones now amplified through relentless demand from outside, felt the weight of accumulated decisions not shared suddenly find hinges open. Layers of command structures reacted in swift succession, grappling ties between legitimacy and crisis linking further control. The video quickly spread beyond precinct halls, capturing attention from the media outside now dissected under scrutiny's sweeping beams. Even Emily, contextualized within a rally morphing into means distinctly aware, considered its breadth, her commitment resonating in tandem. The crowd, electrified, split into vivid reactions vocally meeting unfiltered proof that resonated through stories too long overshadowed. The officers' struggle to process and to redefine became entangled with the inevitability of consequence characterized in the room, emerging starkly as the elevator doors opened to a new call, beyond protocol, parallel only by requisite compass, held anew through voice and image intertwined. Amid the charged landscape, James's journey transformed from isolated testimony captured in lurking shadows to a broadcast of unveiled justice rendered visible. The cameras capturing Emily's collectives thrived under newly gained integrity, gathering pace, staking intent where inequality often stood as sentry closeted in its structured complacency. The resonant proof kept running, unfolding perspectives in its rhythm, punctuated by their own concepts of what justice, once implicit, meant now articulated, facing its dimension architecturally suspended, open for discussion. As the precinct watched, absorbed and reticent as it wrestled change into plausible narratives, James's role was reaffirmed. Behind the filmed truth was a louder voice, speaking not merely to systems but to people, urging reevaluation under eyes newly comprehending, affirming continuity, not as cynical reversion but hopeful action, progressing new stories based on necessary causes. It was the rippling effect, no longer prone to the domain curiosity occupied, a prelude advancing legends imagined real but long enacted silently, spreading solidified manifestos, conceived from scattered vocalities. Before another frame froze history's parcel, there ceased momentum marked in perpetual impasse, permanently eternalized within the ranks, embodied both past and future in its coherency. James. Communications shared forward, unwritten if unvoiced steadfast, anticipated unwaringly what lied, then mastered, once understood. Lessons culminating in resilient ground freshly tilled upon. The video continued to circulate through the precinct, slapping raw truth into the faces of those who preferred the numb comfort of routine over the sting of reality. For the officers embroiled in James's arrest, this footage was indisputable testimony, not just of their systemic missteps, but of every subtle prejudice they had allowed to balloon unchecked. Officer Thompson sat at his desk, the intensity on the screen mirrored in his hardened eyes. He replayed the footage in his mind, those few seconds now a damning eternity, carved into his career like a scar. "We followed procedure," he murmured, as if convincing himself might erase the world's judgment. Rafferty shook his head, the color in his face drained from realization and fear, a potent mix about to boil over into accountability. "Procedure? Or did we just go off looks and assumptions?" he asked, voice clipped with the truth now, jabbing at him from every side. Their conversation haltingly pulled in those stationed near enough to overhear, drawing them into a reflective orbit around an unfairness they'd long denied. The reality, static and alive on screen, left no room for convenient interpretations or the comfortable shadows of ignorance. Meanwhile, Officer Alex watched from the corner of the room. He'd viewed the injustices within his precinct through hesitant lenses, wanting to believe in the goodness of intentions if not actions, but the video was irrefutable. For Alex, this marked a moment of profound clarity. "It's not just about getting caught," Alex finally spoke up, his voice steady but resolute. "It's about understanding that there's a bigger picture we've chosen to ignore." His words resounded through the precinct, bouncing off their defensive walls, challenging the silence that stretched thin against integrity's call. A collective pause ensued. The officers, once a tightly woven fabric of compliance, felt the frayed edges of doubt unravel their certainty. A fray not unpleasant, but enlightening. They were forced into introspection, permitting accountability to populate the spaces left barren by prior inaction. In the captain's office, Warner assessed the growing disquiet filtering through his precinct. He was a leader now, poised on the cusp of transformation, embodying potential stability desperately needed in chaotic flux. But beneath the facade of control, he lingered in deliberation, struggling with this opportunity to redefine institutional values, in dire need of reform. Outside, oblivious of the strained introspection within, the crowd remained vocal. Emily's firm direction continued to steer their emotions towards constructive demands, shaping their protest into a plea for lasting justice rather than transient upheaval. Her standard was justice achievable, tethered to frameworks that previously seemed hopelessly abstract. As the precinct initiated grappling with necessary transformations, coping mechanisms growing beyond immediate fabrications, Thompson faced Rafferty, internal echoes dictating what words stumbled upon clarity. "We need to do better," Thompson admitted, his acknowledgement burdened with sincerity. Rafferty nodded, reservedly accepting the new course. "Maybe it's time we listen instead of explaining away mistakes. This job shouldn't just be about command, but community." In this humility, the precinct began its reckoning, eschewing willful ignorance, now displaced by awareness expanding composure and responsibility alike. The moment bridged lessons too long deferred, clinging to the cusp of renewal, where quit necessity pulled everyone towards astutely imprinted disposition, allowing paths forward crafted in direction previously unseen. As night deepened towards morning, impressions left upon myotrophic hearts moved beyond protocol-lined walls, sculpting more facilitated dialogue inviting change. Ceaseless progression found itself gesturing motion, banning placid observances in favor of embracing welcomed growth subtly through seasoned comprehension, unheard in watches before, gathered vividly whenever light wove wholly awakened dawn. James remained composed in the back of the SUV, his thoughts a tightly wound spring awaiting release, his gaze unflinching as it passed over the city's nightlights, reflecting resolute, determined. For him, the past hours felt like an otherworldly odyssey, a journey from menial anonymity to a critical chess piece in an unfolding game of justice and federal maneuvering. Beside him, Agent Slater navigated the tension with a keen awareness of the precipice they all stood upon. His communication device crackled intermittently, a reminder that their isolation carried stressors and allies beyond immediate reaches. "James," Slater said, to break in silence warm and firm, "it's imperative we keep your location secure from this point forward. The information you have is volatile. It has the power to decide the tide of entire operations." James nodded. The weight of facts he harbored immeasurable, but also potent in its capacity to pivot paradigms. Yet it was also personal, an intersection of identities he balanced with justification, a convergence of vigilance beyond individual discretion. "I understand what's at risk," James replied, his voice steady as they passed under yet another flickering street lamp, casting long shadows into ephemeral moments. "This can't just be about one voice anymore. It's about every voice that has been silenced." Mel shifted beside him, her demeanor a fortress of resolve, ready to protect the integrity they collectively carried. A task too significant for her, both personally and professionally. Her representation extended as a beacon of acceptance, intent swearing that rights weighed under conviction must concretely parallel function beyond surface engagement. "James," she added, her voice dripping with conviction born from battles too numerous to recite, "our path forward has one end goal, ensuring what's right is done and seen by all who have ignored it too long." The gravitas of their dialogue pressed against idle small talk, reverberating through the inner chambers of their transport, bouncing through confines making expanses ordained by truth alone. It was a promise whispered in the silent lulls between realized motion, edges blurred and disclosed anew. "Will the others talk?" James asked, the intelligence he implied stretching past mere questions and into the frameworks, providing momentum, propelled into reality outside typical perceptions. "They're ready," Slater assured, optimism threading delicately through the steady pace governing his leadership. "But it needs one consistent truth to bind everything revealed. That consistency lies here, with you." The paths these revelations took resonated with their implications. They were embers lifting from the dark pockets where doubt had subsisted, igniting spaces forgotten beneath diligent pretenses, unraveling narratives destabilized in function without coherent locus. James's eyes lingered on the passing blurs of the city, seeing beyond what mere brick and mortar projected as secure. It wasn't just the structures they sought to reshape, but the minds inhabiting them, their behaviors, honed into climates seeking predictions founded on principles awash through innovative reaffirmation. "It's strange," James finally remarked, his voice a quiet thread woven through a looming tapestry still forming, "to be here, carrying it all. But if it means upholding justice with consequences designed for a greater whole, then it's worth it." Slater nodded, sketching quiet solidarity, appreciation not through vocal agreements but through decades honed in service, now holding days of conscientious endeavor. The fusion provided each their own markers, guiding interpretation of duty primed for fulfillment. The SUV turned a corner, creeping ever closer to their secure destination, a nexus where histories, truths, and futures collided. Inside, James's secret emerged layered like sediment, prescribed within a wider narrative finally turned perceptible. Each beginning shifted upon preceding privilege or assumed ignorance, a voice committed to evolving potential over perennial alteration. Their journey mirrored the dawn's emerging glow, soon gracing their steps, mapping their way back into latent awareness. Patterns aligned in infinite dance through moments dawning anew. It promised a cornerstone, unmoored from deception hitherto dominated, now radiating justice reborn as quintessential truth among limitless horizons ahead. Back within the precinct, the tension lingered in the air, the atmosphere a faint hum of activity interlaced with apprehension. Officer Alex, standing amidst a changing tide, felt the weight of a decision pressing upon him with a gravity he'd only speculated in the abstract. The rookie cop had come to this station with dreams of fearless justice and duty done right, yet reality forged a different path, a serpentine trail weaving between shadow and clarity, where covering the status quo seemed more honorable than understood, more opaque than transparent. Alex's thoughts churned as evidence unfolded more clearly around him. The video had presented an irrefutable visual truth that ensnared doubts just as efficiently as it severed ties with self-defensive protestations. It was a moment resonating both as chapter and challenge, forcing him to confront whether complicity lay in silence or in mislaid action. With external pressure mounting and internal dialogues demanding recalibration, the rookie stood poised on the brink of irrevocable transformation. Across from him, the veteran officer Thompson sat at his desk, an air of authority now faded, tinged with the quiet desolation of a man still reconciling unseen errors, woven through unseen conscientious walls. His sigh was heavy, dense with introspection as words formed, indecision peering from their shadows. "Alex," he began, a voice gruffer than the rookie expected, "have you ever felt like you were part of something bigger than you understood?" Alex regarded him, conceivable truths now unpeeled and discernible, seeking courage within their simplicity. "Often," he admitted finally, after the tension of longing to depart from unwavering bonds released breath slowly, accepting candidness impending rhetorical validation. Thompson nodded, and in that nod was something unsaid but realized, an acceptance of what had transpired since James's arrest. It was the early breaking of a mental dam that held back more than action. It nurtured reflective potential. "We've got needs beyond what this precinct currently holds," Alex continued, propelled by the momentum of change that simmered just beneath the seasoned surface of tradition. "We need transparency and reform. More than that, we've got to acknowledge when mistakes are made and make things right." Thompson's gaze was thoughtful, eyes flickering over subdued forms habitually moved beyond. "You're young, Alex," he said, "but not naive. I think there's wisdom in what you're saying, more than we've been willing to see." As if his admission swung open unseen barriers, the precinct began to hum once more, tension breaking apart into discernible voices initiating re-examination, incrementally offering statements temporarily held unreachable, bond against what realities freshly insisted. In his quiet, earthen resolve, Alex contemplated if now was the time to be the unseen catalyst of change, one hand pressing toward the passage of reform, tempered by increments of integrity, respectful of nuance and authentic consideration. Unspoken agreement between him and Thompson slowly imbued clarity throughout the precinct, sewing threads of reflection into their practices and striking conversations, gradually molding into shaped proposals, ironically lacking only societally anticipated declarations. Elsewhere, Schultz watched the scene with interest tinged imperceptibly by newfound respect. She saw them dissecting norms too often followed blindly, ready now to align with acts expressive and considerate of potential reformative choice. Rising from her desk, she joined the group, silently signaling unity with her younger colleague. endorsing difficult truths housed unequivocally past exercised identity. Direction, swapping roles between opposition, explained through desire for competitive altruism. As Alex spoke, conviction lay undiverted, not loud but reinforcing what reality insisted. It's not easy, but change never is. Doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. Their testimonies spread within walls now delineated, tracing prospectus, freed from narrative oscillations that extended rituals, yet curiously embraced tangible origins between united professed truths, bridging participation and understanding. As the night edged further forward toward dawn and the promise of renewal cast shadows indistinct and inviting, Alex felt the pull of hope not just within himself, but among his colleagues. Past assumptions dissolved into fresh breaths of persistence, a testament not alone as reformative trajectory, but affirming thoughtfully imprinted influence, drawing persistent paths forward, in balance against historic resonance, ultimately leaving choices solidified into confirmations the new day supported. And in that silence, bridged by evolving conversation and thoughtful action, the precinct stirred with an acknowledgement that their futures, and the futures of those they protected, were unwritten, but poised for a clarity more authentic than any proximate realities ever revealed before. The day emerged with the optimism of fresh beginnings weaving through the precinct as night retreated. Outside, the crowd had not dissipated but transformed. The initial spark of protest had matured into a carefully orchestrated movement, propensity geared not towards mere outrage, but actionable change. The strategic evolution was driven by voices like Emily Sanchez's and nearby the unwavering presence of community figures previously sidelined, now central to the dialogue. In a small office tucked away from the precinct's main room, a makeshift war room of passion and resolve, Melanie Rourke prepared to ignite the next charge in the struggle for reform. The room buzzed with activity as advocacy moved from thought to action, the polished edges of purpose cutting sharply into institutional malaise once left unchallenged. Mel, called Amir Patel, a veteran community organizer whose years of turning whispers into resolute action were legendary. We need to finalize the lineup for the press conference. This can't just be about one case. It has to resonate across the broader narrative we're building here. Mel looked up from the stacks of notes and affirmations bearing the names of those affected, their stories streaming through her vision, never forgotten. To her, these were promises she planned on keeping. Exactly, Amir, Mel replied, determination lining her words. This press conference isn't just about voicing our anger, it's about presenting the solutions we're demanding. A call for accountability, and a commitment to real reform. The conference would include educators like Marlon Harris, activists, ex-police officers turned advocates, people whose lives intersected with the justice system, each bearing testimony of experiences informed by unfairly weighted scales. Collectively, they formed a mosaic of change, each piece interlocked, strengthening the assemblage wider than bilateral worldview perspectives allowed and partitioned confines. As the final arrangements fell into place, Mel glanced toward James, now seated among advocates who, moments ago, had welcomed him not merely as a focal point, but a harbinger of future-led testimonies, each engagement with purity initially undiscerned, beyond personalized, encumbered shadows. "Ready to talk to the press, James?" Mel asked, her question charged with the urgency of the moment, not as a task but a challenge, entwined with historic relevance, destined to ripple through the core. James nodded, resolve clear in his expression. It's time people listened, and not just to defend themselves. This press conference, it's my chance to speak for everyone who hasn't been heard. Emily entered the room, energy abounding, hands filled with vibrant posters, each radiating calls for change anchored in vivid colors, a visual campaign supplementing the clout of spoken discourse. "He won't catch their attention," she remarked, her serious tone tinged with a lightness in celebration of collective efficacy about to be outwardly championed. The others nodded in agreement, the room's ambiance inhaled progress, minds aligning with decisions that abandoned monologue for symphony, harmony resonating with patterns, sculpting acknowledged participation. As the community prepared for the push, media outlets began to circle outside, eager lenses poised to document each word, motion and undulating curiosity morphing keenly into awareness. The world looked on, cameras capturing snapshots of an entire community mobilizing, their voices unified against the tide. It was nearly time. The lineup stood ready, diverse voices poised at the edge of the dais, a myriad of stories about to break universal silence into conversational avalanche. Their convergence commemorated not their struggles, but the persistence of willing departure into actionable conversation, designed as reasoned countermeasures bearing equilibrium. Guided by both passion and preparation, the collective advanced towards the waiting press. Mel led with an expression that spoke of every battle hard fought and not yielded. "We're here to make sure change isn't just talked about behind closed doors," said Amia, to no one in particular, wishing the sentiment would find roots sprouting among augmenting surroundings, unnoticed, except by those ideating the same. As James stepped forward, surrounded by advocates turned allies, each knew the pressures weighed beyond perception's lens. But today, aligned against indifference, they wielded truth, a sharp blade refined over decades, finally unveiled to cut through any doubt. As microphones buzzed with expectant fervor and anxious townspeople watched, the palpable sensation of history solidified. Today wasn't just another mark on the timeline. It was destined to be the start of a closed era transitioning towards restorative chronicles. With voices raised, they stepped into an ever-widening circle of accountability. Unwilling to turn back, the assembly affirmed in action, once placed upon a past mired in inaction, promising futures now poised upon actively encouraging unification beyond hesitation. As the conference began, resulting actions bore alignment. A resounding assertion, interlaced paths now engaged in tangible discourse. Assuring outer thresholds summoned answers undisclosed beneath mere timeless whispers. An oratory unquestionably vibrant resided immediately within synchronized possibilities, patiently awaiting blaze. Boldness fueled resolved imaginations, fulfilling them freshly awakened, untethered by time. As the press conference commenced beneath the bright glare of purpose-driven lights, the scent of rain mingled with the hopeful anticipation in the air, an omen of change on the horizon. James stood front and center, flanked by Mel, Emily, and Marlon, united as figures carved from collective resolve. Before them, a sea of journalists and community members leaned in, ready to capture every word that would echo against the walls of history. Cameras clicked incessantly, the flash illuminating faces no longer content with silence, but charged with assertion. The area perched between formal protest and spontaneous dialogue. The fragile precipice, a bridge of potent dialogue cascading purpose with rhythmic determination. Mel took to the microphone first, her voice unwavering, a constant wave propelling towards the necessary shores of reform. "We gather here not for spectacle, but for a pivot," she began, gesture sweeping over the audience, now bracing to receive, towards a justice system demanding accountability. "Today, we plant seeds for transparency that must take root." She deftly outlined the discrepancies revealed not just through James's ordeal, but echoed in similar stories, waved too often away by the current's precedent. Each infraction like water droplets forging persistent cracks in justice's assumed armor. Each facet now collectively extricated. At her steady cue, James took over, inhaling deeply as his eyes scanned the crowd, each face both stranger and ally enlivening his resolve, stitching bravery over acquaintance in realms dialed to nuanced understanding. "This isn't just my story," James began, his voice coated with the calm intensity of truth resigned from isolation. "For too long, those given power have abused it, choosing judgment over integrity. But today is about changing that. It's about demanding our systems reflect shared humanity rather than divisive prejudice." His words hung in the air, an invocation more profound for its naked honesty. A ripple moved across reporters, their pens poised to note the shift, a subtle tremor beneath societal constructs accustomed to denials, becoming unsteady disclosures invited. Emily stepped forward next, charged with the energy of communal vehemence. Our communities, every day, people like you and me are rising. We refuse to be silenced any longer and demand the same freedom, justice, and respect given to those who deny it. As she spoke, the thrum of agreement rose from the crowd. Words transformed into strength felt viscerally by those gathered. Everyone attuned to history, vibrating just below the surface, awaiting to innovate the potential within release and renewal. Marlon followed, his experience with youth anchoring emotion with seasoned resolve, addressing the educational divide that perpetuated injustice. Our schools must teach history's truth, fostering generations who understand equality not as an abstract but an actionable promise. His declaration seamlessly melded into the overarching narrative. Education wasn't as minor and rose merely projected behind podiums, it echoed immediacy. A choreography dispersed throughout broader societal expectation. Questions flew from the press, voices probing, yet empowered by newfound openness, facilitated through accountability led by choice. Dialogue fostered among potentials, each speaking not merely to what needed correction, but what achievable dimensions inherent courage applied for should champion. And amidst the questions, challenges and resolutions unveiled in their promised translucence, surmounted dual themes as hero and harbinger, stood resiliently, symbolic of pivotal transformation, presented dynamically binding, company, not layouts, transient. The congregation, unified as collective liaison amid traditions bent under perspicacity's growl, recognized that this conference was more than a series of statements. It was a contract, an oath taken to move forward in unity, to surge past old boundaries into spaces where apologies grew into policy. Signs of rain started, blessing the dedication of spirits earnestly celebrating justice beyond private mediation, teeming beneath exuberant conformity to revelations harnessed. As the conference reached its crescendo, those gathered understood the path ahead would demand more than words. It required sustained effort, unwavering dedication, and continued partnership among everyone willing to work towards change undisguised. The rain cleared shadows and invigorated commitment, offering promise envisioned along every empathetic stream, already verdant with intent. Muted both quietly and overtly, blazed towards new horizons, refashioning peace out of persistent adversity, tilting the status quo towards lucidity conceived for reform. With that inception ensured, each story bore alongside collective resonance, driven anew, futures shaped by multifaceted articulations, elevating themes surmised chiefly to transcend preceding definitions, eternal yet reborn, freshly encased within confident hope's embrace. The press conference concluded to murmurs of approval, the resonance of purpose lingering long after the last words were spoken. As the crowd dispersed, energized and aligned with newfound determination, the precinct's officers began grappling with the repercussions wafting through their ranks, like the echoes of a distant storm pressing upon their conscious awareness. Inside the precinct, an uneasy equilibrium had settled over the officers, a fusion of reflection and apprehension as they processed the cascade of revelations induced by public scrutiny and internal conflict. The sense of inviolable authority had been shaken, replaced by the burgeoning discomfort of re-evaluation. Captain Warner sat at his desk, expression grim, as he sifted through reports and documents that now demanded not just procedural completion but empathetic understanding. He felt pinned between the rigidity of procedure and the undeniable wave of societal change, crashing over his once staunchly defended fortress. The precinct's vibe had shifted. Officers clustered in small groups, exchanging opinions that ran the gamut from defensiveness to genuine concern. Prominent among these discussions was the recognition that the machinery of justice, long thought immutable, now stood at a crossroads, its gears catching and slipping over newfound obstacles and possibilities. Within this churning cauldron of uncertainty, Officer Alex found his resolve solidifying amid the swirling chaos of potential growth. He had always believed that true change could sprout from even the most entrenched systems, if nurtured by individuals willing to embody both humility and progress. Seeing this as an opportunity to invoke transformation, Alex imagined himself not as a mere cog in the wheel, but as an agent of positive change. His perceptions had been irreversibly altered by James's ordeal, a catalyst he embraced as an educational opportunity not to be wasted. With intention guiding his steps, Alex ventured into Captain Warner's office, his stomach a mix of nervous tension and hopeful optimism. The captain acknowledged him with a nod, gesturing to a chair that seemed both inviting and daunting in equal measure. "Captain," Alex began, hands folded with sincerity rather than formal stiffness, "I think we need to talk about what just happened today. Not just about James' case, but about our precinct's role in the broader context of community trust and accountability." Warner regarded the young officer, his eyes weary but glinting with the refinement of gratitude spurred by someone earnest enough to challenge rather than comply. "You've got my ear, Alex. What are you proposing?" Buoyed by this receptive humility, Alex pressed on, unfurling ideas cultivated through the lens of fairness. Reform has to be more than reactive. It has to be proactive. We need to initiate implicit bias training, involve community figures in advisory roles, and ensure our policies reflect a commitment to transparency and equity. This should become our priority. Warner leaned back in his chair, considering the weight of Alex's words. Ideas teeming with initiative beyond obligatory resilience. For years, the captain had wrestled with the constraints of tradition, repressive yet protective, and here emerged a new movement disrupting the same but nourishing reflection. Unsought. He nodded slowly, a sign of acknowledgement yet inherently tentative, change's construct seldom cast in Stern City's simplicity. "You may be right, Alex," he said, after a thoughtful pause, pregnant with possibilities untethered. "It won't be easy, but I do agree it's time for us to evolve." "Yes, it will be tough," Alex agreed, his voice infused with conviction and respect. "But if we don't adapt, we're just perpetuating the harm we're supposed to prevent. We owe it to the community and to ourselves." Their dialogue, hopeful but cautious, electrified the precinct's resonant patterns. Others overheard, motivated by the realization that stirring directions were possible, not through resistance but through bearings once unmoved, now shifted exploratively toward collaboration and recalibrated engagement. While challenges loomed extensive, requiring united resolve and an earnest dedication to reform, the bedrock of this institution began its gradual shift from hallowed tradition to adaptable growth. True resolution demanded an iterative evolution, its steps guided by nurturing principles, stitched under assurance's love, punctuated by knowledge. Alex's determination, now mirroring his captain's implicit assent, cast a shadow into hushful vibrance, mingling resolve with understanding that ignited potential where perception once dulled. This small beginning promised a future where change, responsible yet optimistic, could be sustained through collective belief. Together, they stood on the precipice of transformation, attuned to the whispers of progress that stirred around them, and poised to write new chapters, each word an intention, each action a promise, to not only keep peace, but forge justice under the banners of compassionate truth. The community center's hall buzzed with activity, the animated discussions echoing across the room as neighbors, activists, and officials gathered for the much-anticipated town meeting. This wasn't just any meeting. It was the culmination of voices crescendoing into a symphony, demanding recognition, accountability, and tangible steps towards reform. James's story had touched a nerve, sparking a flame that burned brightly in the hearts of those who had long felt marginalized by the very systems meant to protect them. Today, the room teemed with expectation, conversations threaded with a shared determination to push for change. At the center of this dynamic assembly sat James's mother, Margaret Tucker. Her presence was a powerful reminder of the personal stakes involved, a living testament to both the struggles endured and the hope that fueled this movement. She watched as people took their seats, her steely resolve an anchor in the deep waters of societal tides. Marlon Harris, the school teacher who had become a key community voice, rose to the podium, his stature commanding but approachable. He raised a hand, calling for quiet, the room settling into a focused anticipation. "Thank you all for making time to be here today," Marlon began, his voice carrying the calm authority of a leader attuned to the heartbeat of his community. "We're not here just to talk. We're here to listen, to plan, and to hold our institutions accountable." Around him, the room stirred with murmurs of support, individuals nodding, the agreements unsaid but palpably felt. Margaret, ignoring the weight of preconceived narratives often laid over mothers of this world's resilient canvas, stood, her gaze unyielding under the fluorescent lights illuminating faux neutrality but inviting real transparency. "My son's experiences are not isolated," she announced, her voice unwavering, rich with the cadence of a lifetime spent navigating injustices and standing strong. "This is about ensuring no other mother, no other family, faces what we have. Our demands are simple: accountability, transparency, and genuine reform." Each word was a call to action, striking chords that reverberated through the crowd. Those gathered could not help but share in her vision, in her hope that their collective voice would not just be heard, but would resonate loudly enough to inspire the systemic change they so desperately sought. As Margaret's words absorbed into the room, another figure stepped forward, Chief Daniels, an officer who had quietly championed integrity from within, now tasked with bridging the gap between authority and the community it was sworn to serve. "Many of us wear this badge," Daniels began, gesturing to the emblem on his chest, the symbol that had come to mean so many things to so many people. "But it's what we do while wearing it that defines our legacy. We need to recognize where the gaps in our service are and commit to closing them through understanding and action." There were mixed reactions, some skeptical, others hopeful, but it was the beginning of a dialogue that had long been absent, a discourse unhurried by symbolism yet charged by necessity. As voices rose with questions and solutions, the meeting became an organic forum, fluid in its dynamic exchanges. Proposals for citizen review boards, renewed training modules addressing bias, and transparent investigation processes took center stage, each idea dissected and rebuilt in real time by those who understood the urgency. James watched from the side, an active participant but carried by an eagerness to amplify the mosaic forming through shared narratives. This wasn't just about his story, but about countless others, those who couldn't be there physically yet, whose spirits claimed seats reserved timelessly, still insisting on belonging. Marlon, taking the lead once more, summed up the evening's ethos elegantly. "This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of a long journey. We'll weave our stories into a narrative so compelling it can't be ignored. It's time we own our narrative and rewrite the script." As the meeting drew to a close, the energy in the room was palpable. The community was no longer just a collection of individuals. It was a collective, a movement with its history, hurt, and hope firmly intertwined. For Margaret, watching her son's calm demeanor embrace the momentum forging their efforts, she recognized something akin to pride but also duty, a cycle renewed in generations but reborn in potentiality. The night extended its bright clarity into a tapestry of determined hearts willing revelation into realization, burgeoning from exchanges spoken earlier, fledgling, now inherently alive. In the weeks to come, they would face challenges and resistance, but they would do so together, a united force driven by vision and a refusal to settle for anything less than true justice. This gathering was their dawn, a moment where community met intention and where change, humanized, became more than just a dream. It became a collective promise. As the echoes of the town meeting began to quiet, the precinct and its officers faced an evening decidedly more introspective than any before. A tangible weight lay upon the air, a historical burden revealed in threads of the present, demanding reflection on their collective part in settings too long composed in repeating tones of residual indifference. Within the precinct's heart, a narrow hallway bore witness to hushed voices, conversations among older officers who had spent decades patrolling the streets, their experiences mirroring the subtle shifts in society's pulse. Among them, Officer Carla Hines, whose tenure in the force spanned over 3 decades, carried both the wisdom and wariness of someone who had seen the system change and remain unchanged in equal parts. As Hines leaned against the corridor's dull cream walls, her mind flitting back through memories of past events, the voices around her painted a mosaic of unease and retrospection. Her eyes scanned the familiar faces, defenders of a fragile peace that now required reimagining. "Remember the protests back in '86, murmured Officer Thompson to no one in particular, but the words landed heavily in the surrounding silence. Same calls for reform, same promise for change. Didn't amount to much then, Officer Rafferty chimed in, a shadow of cynicism tracing his words. He hunched forward, his posture wearing defeat's heavy mantle more than just uniformity allowed. Sure feels different this time, though, doesn't it? There was a momentary pause, a shared understanding weaving through the tired resignation that hope, once dismissed, now demanded attention in ways resounding more immediate and tangible. It wasn't merely systemic, it was personal, touching them deeply within roles consigned to weathering ongoing tumult from within and without. Hines, upon whose shoulders rested the lifetimes of officers she'd trained and watched grow, remained silent, yet knew that now, this time, their acknowledgments were inseparable from their duties. Tied forever to each call sign, within presentations emerging pensively truthful. "It ain't just a repeat," she finally said, deciding she'd gathered enough of her thoughts and courage. "People aren't just angry, they're expectant. And hell, perhaps so are we." Her words resonated, revealing the quiet defiance of someone who had seen too much not to voice its unveiling. She stood for a moment longer in silence, gaze hard but not unkind, before continuing down the hall, her presence leaving a wake of reflection. Young officers listened keenly, experiencing for the first time the echoes of undulating change, revealed by intersections tracing legacies forged upon outdated practices, swaying towards emergent bonds across shared convictions. Officer Alex, amidst this constellation of stories both kindled and constrained, felt the tensions threading iterations beneath collected canvases. He saw the canny resolve in Hines's eyes, the tension wrought between longing for comfort and the need for change. Determined to carry this momentum into action, Alex approached Hines, voicing the uncertainties stirring restlessly within. "Do you think we're ready to change, Officer Hines?" She regarded him thoughtfully, expression a blend of optimism and tempered caution. "We've got to be, Alex. We don't have much choice, but readiness is only part of it. Willingness to endure the discomfort of change matters as much." The precinct itself seemed to echo her sentiment, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering with every step taken towards genuine, accountable transformation. The lives that moved within its boundaries found new context within their walls, integrity enriched by arriving possibilities anew. "Let's make sure our actions speak louder than just we're trying," Alex replied, motivation entwining its roots within assurances spoken and embodying proactive foundations carved newly refined through language unguarded in purpose. As the precinct doors led outside, their luminescence casting long shadows over procedures questioned, sought new ground, and awaited forthcoming evolution, the familiarity of old patterns held just beneath ever-revolving tides. In understanding such profound journeys, Alex realized, personified stories complexly interwove destinies only, spoken through inclusivity now uncovered, bounding communities colored by revelations resolved to revitalize possibilities nurtured just past traditions constrained. This wasn't merely about past echoes, it was about building something that finally recognized, reflected, and respected every voice. Hours stretched into possibilities endless enough for foundations affixed beyond surface engagement alone, sketching collaborative narratives more freely toward aspirational ideals. And the precinct, once a bastion of rigid habit, stood poised upon this new intersection, as much a symbol of history as it was a beacon of aspiring change, determined to resonate across time's rippling expanse. The courtroom's marble floors gleamed with a starkness that mirrored the austere, imposing facade of justice. On this day, it held more gravity than any other, a space where the future of policy and reform awaited conviction, driven by truth but burdened with reluctance. The grand chamber was filled with murmuring spectators, their anticipation akin to the moment before a symphonic note's first reverberation, a silence underscored by a yearning for change. The defendant's table was not occupied by an individual today, but by a concept much larger: systemic malfeasance, now called into question. James sat calmly in the gallery, joined by those whose stories intersected his, an assembly of shared resilience threading through each gaze, bearing witness to transformative potential. His presence was both a reminder and an assurance, interwoven with the identities caught within justice's elaborate snare. At the front, where gavel yearly preached soliloquized authority, stood Melanie Rourke. She radiated confidence, a seasoned tactician turned advocate, mastering her choreography under vibrant banners claiming equity. Today's hearing wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. It was the amplification of each quiet whisper that demanded a world awake and aware. "Your Honor," Mel began, her voice clear and unwavering, projecting over the anxious theater. "Today, we challenge not just actions, but the very systems that allowed those actions to thrive unchecked. We demand that justice not just speak, but listen and act." In response, the prosecution countered with arguments steeped in tradition, but now audibly faltering on procedural edges, frayed from assumptions once binding definitive. They portrayed their narrative with carefully chosen metaphors, a world weary of simplicity could now no longer agree with. Mel knew both sides of this tableau, could almost predict the words unfurling from the legalese entrenched in formidable resistance. Yet in that rote recitation, she found her strength, a deeper well of resilience manifested by collective truths unadorned, each syllable unsparing. The moment came when witnesses took the stand, a procession of voices performing a litany of revelations revealing facets of injustice drawn from once solitary corners. They spoke with conviction, detailing stories no longer hidden in silence but liberated by visibility. As each story unfolded, the courtroom absorbed a potency too profound to ignore. Jurors listened intently, drawn closer to tangible expressions of inequity. These were not just witnesses, they were heralds of change, aviators navigating worn paths, reforming trails beyond obscurity emergent. James, listening, could not help but feel the unity within narratives, each voice layered upon his, validating a shared determination to unspool tangled truths, tangled mercilessly within cloistered echoes, now familiar in their communal dispossession, but resolved, professionally satisfied. The defense's rebuttal, though methodical, seemed aged next to the clarity of those proclaiming aspirations before unattainable, founded on resolve inspired by enduring common aspirations. Their usual tactics of deflection and obfuscation seemed suddenly out of place in a world turned clear by transparency. Mel seized on this waning momentum, making her closing arguments not just feel impassioned, but necessary, a driving chorus through empathy and intellect synchronized. We stand at the crossroads of historical repetition and revolutionary change, she declared, speaking not just to the judge, but to every ear that had taken part in the proceedings. Let us forge a future where justice isn't justified by exclusion, but inclusion, where every voice contributes to the harmony of equality. The courtroom fully hushed, imbibed with promise and responsibility alike. Each person sensed the palpable shift in atmosphere, a harmony found not simply within justice, but actively initiated and unrelenting determination committed, imaginatively, to its fruition. As deliberations proceeded, the pacing echo of footsteps stretched the heavy seconds into eternity. Outside, the city continued its rhythmic pulse, tensions and hope tirelessly wheeling away the middle ground between preconceived standards and inspired evolution. James watched another chapter unfold before him, knowing that this courtroom, this testament to human capability, was but one node in a tenuous yet strengthening constellation as ancient as it was nascent in this new configuration. The verdict, when at last delivered, erupted in applause, a decision that endorsed transparency but, more crucially, heralded accountability. James leaned back, relief and victory coursing through him. Not just for his triumph, but for the collective they all wovenly represented, and for all that lay ahead, soon untold but abounding nonetheless. In the alleys of history, whispers ascended to a roar, the proclamation enshrined not solely upon pages, but carved critically into the core of human endeavor. This case was its own cycle, but the pattern weaving around it held perpetual intelligence on its reach. The doors to the chamber opened to dawn, transforming through action. Each participant within carried the light forward, threading continuity and harmonic purpose within expectations recast. Justice had triumphed, yes, but so had humanity, one voice at a time. The echoes of the courtroom's decision resonated through the precinct and across the community, creating ripples that pushed deeply into the heart of long-standing issues. Outside, the air seemed fresher, laced with the tang of rain-washed streets, as if the very world was pausing to breathe before exhaling into a new phase of awareness. In the aftermath, the media captured the jubilation and relief of those who had fought tirelessly for justice. But behind closed doors, intricate processes were already set in motion. The lines between victory and lasting change were drawn distinctly, requiring sustained effort. James, having been the protagonist of this turning point, stepped back momentarily, observing the renewed fervor around him. He knew that despite the win, real work remained. A foundation had been built, but the structure of reform required dedication from everyone, especially those who had yet to fully grasp the scope of required changes. Within the precinct, officers gathered for a debriefing that carried more weight than any routine meeting. Captain Warner stood at the helm, battle-worn yet resolute, ready to lead his team into uncharted terrain, reshaping what being in service truly meant. "We've been given a chance," Warner began, his tone a mixture of authority and sincere contemplation. "Not to rewrite what's in the books, but to redefine our actions and align them with a community deserving of true commitment from its protectors." A hush fell over the room, punctuated by the silent acknowledgement of a collective mission birthed from reflective discernment. A mission not just to serve, but to restore trust. The officers were engaged directly, eyes turning toward the captain as they navigated newfound territory. "We've all seen the video, lived these past months under its weight," Warner continued, his gaze sweeping across familiar faces. "It's time to take those messages to heart. We must adhere to transparency, not just as protocol, but as principle." The precinct buzzed in silent agreement, a knowing undercurrent of affirmation. Beyond compliance, this marked the beginning of their transformation, a rebirth ignited by choice, and evidenced through every exchanged glance and quiet resolve. It was a community of officers and citizens alike, standing together as agents in metamorphosis. Officer Alex, standing among his peers, felt his heart lift with both anticipation and responsibility. His hands were the future's sculptors, aided by senior ranks no longer constraining indefinable layers in accountability but rather emboldening them. This realization struck a chord. A note struck for participation rest longer than simple solitude could sing, while echoing upon modern societal hymnal. As the meeting progressed into a workshop focused on implicit bias training, new ranks of understanding were built. Triangle notes fugaciously experienced around teams now confronting what once remained unseen. Each exercise fostered not only awareness but camaraderie among officers, nurturing opportunities for growth born amid matured reflection. Sharing these processes were members from the community who had demanded change with respectful yet resounding promises, tasked now with reinforcing to represent narratives comprehensively articulated. They became partners in advocating for progressive dynamics once overlooked, establishing heartfelt dialogue, brutally honest yet increasingly reassuring. Their experiences, a patchwork tapestry of histories, educational paths, artfully unbound past barriers, promoting transparency through unwavering resolve, spoke volumes. Escalating transitions, reminding that transcendent transformation adhered, nevertheless, when nurtured collectively. For James, observing this evolution reflected not just its witness, within sightlines removed, but empowered through experiences, ensuring transformation applicable, not temporarily resonant, yet more authentically reinforced. Witnessing individuals like Officer Thompson pace before introspective realities redefined present contexts, his expression intentionally meditative. Meanwhile, Officer Hines, a beacon of wisdom, sided benevolence with inventiveness. They all embraced, reshaped corners of who they could be, eventually. Outside, the clamor of progression arose. The community continued its own journey without pause, but with a unity blossoming toward hope's horizon. Each step forward bore testament to human endurance, courage, and unconditional commitment, where every voice committed retained invaluable complication acknowledgement, readily harnessed into deliberate blendings. As programs set roots, relationships built lines connecting lives toward newly cast understandings. They embraced themselves as drivers of change, not enduring bystanders, crafting an environment where justice served all, where humanity had the first and last word. Eventually, when the sun dipped over the precinct's silhouette, casting long shadows that interwove transient history, a pact anchored by resilience shone boldly between intersectional bounds defining liberal reality. In this moment, not as closure, but passed into invention renewed, each mind turned discerning towards one another, an unquestioned, persistent emblem, activated through shared beliefs and foundational praxis. It was a resolve echoing far from preliminary assumptions, reminiscent but fundamentally re-evaluated, a truth linked timelessly along embellished transformation, yet divine delved toward exertional identity, enthralled at where revelations transit less hallowed paths, unfurled bountiful amidst vibrant horizons. The dawn that followed was a fresh canvas, streaked with the colors of hope intermingled with the hard-won reality of justice. The precedent set in the courtroom reverberated beyond its walls, intricately embedding itself into the very fabric of the precinct and its surrounding community, a symphony newly orchestrated in notes both haunting and harmonic. As news of the verdict spread, it carried with it a newfound understanding that this was not merely a victory for one individual, but a collective triumph for each story intertwined within the struggle. It became a beacon, a lighthouse, guiding reform across the broader landscape. Within the precinct, the atmosphere was charged with a strange mix of exhaustion and invigoration. The officers wore those twin masks, each live wire of their consciousness crackling with the intensity of a freshly realized mandate. Be the better version you're now expected to be. Captain Warner, the steady pilot of this awakening ship, convened his team for a discussion focused not just on policy, but on progress, true, lasting progress, that resonated in every shift change, every dispatch call, every engagement with the people they vowed to protect. "We've crossed a threshold," Warner announced solemnly, his voice resonating with conviction. "But this isn't an end, just a beginning. We've seen with our own eyes what standing idle can cost. It's time we stand together, solidified under a banner of meaningful change." The room absorbed his words, each officer wearing the weight of responsibility like a mantle, symbols of a forward momentum stepping boldly beyond past transgressions. Alex glanced around, catching the eyes of Thompson and Rafferty. He saw something unfamiliar, an openness, a readiness to engage differently, a shift he had long hoped for. Outside these walls, the community mirrored their introspections, a collective ripple of introspection and strategy unfurling within community halls, schools, civic centers, the town's pulse synchronized to a rhythm shape by voices resilient in their determination to move from crisis to coherence. Among those catalysts of change, Emily Sanchez and Margaret Tucker emerged as community liaisons. Their mission was clear: foster conversations both difficult and essential, and nurture a trajectory resilient and inclusive. These dialogues, illuminated by mutual respect, forged understanding once elusive, but now palpable. Emily stood at the forefront of these discussions, her voice no longer merely a rallying cry, but a call for sustained collaboration. "It's easy to say we want change," she spoke to a gathering crowd at the community center, "but it takes real courage to live it. We need all hands on deck, not just to steer us forward, but to guide us where we need to be." Margaret, who had become both an emblem of resolve and a tender whisper of hope, nodded in agreement. "We're not just looking for quick fixes. We want policies and frameworks that reflect who we are, that honor our history and envision our future." Their words were met with applause, not merely for sentiment, but for their embodiment. A trust reassembled with actions to back their phrases, a pledge to recalibrate the past and set courses anew. Back at the precinct, these external pressures translated internally into recalibrated training sessions, comprehensive workshops aimed at dismantling ingrained biases, and open forums welcoming input from community members. Officer Hines, respected among her peers for her unwavering guidance, volunteered to facilitate these training sessions. Her empathetic approach, grounded in experience, gave her insights power, a compass for others navigating their realizations. During one such session, she addressed a room filled with newly inspired officers. Understanding bias isn't admitting fault, it's acknowledging the humanity in all of us. We can no longer ignore what we've learned. We have to integrate it into every aspect of our service. These initiatives bore fruit in the form of community policing models focused on engagement and partnership, policies emphasizing accountability, and an ever-watchful, ever-learning attitude pervading the precinct's culture, a transformation visible through everyday interactions reclaimed by respect. As days blurred but intentions crystallized, the precinct became a beacon, a remodeled institution heeded not solely for authority it once assumed, but admires for reform, earned through lived accountability. And so the legacy began weaving through every step taken. Their leave-in enforcement's name affirmed no longer about authority for authority's sake, but about standing firm in responsibility. Together, officers and citizens drafted the ongoing narrative of mutual respect and justice, contextualized longer than any single moment, but extended into lifetimes, shared under skies welcoming hope. The work faced challenges undeniably still to come, but momentum had shifted irrevocably, building through a movement's keystones, where each heart now stood united. As the precinct's doors opened to another day, life thrummed with the unimaginable, yet attainable, a future bright with the promise of change, shaped together. The dawn beheld a journey realized, rose-tinted through edges adorned with what promise ultimately sought. Progress wrought through unflinching determination, translating one's silent intent into enduring conversation. In those breaths, transition beamed gloriously, undeterred through shadows momentarily eclipsed. They affirmatively imagined what resolve commences actively unfolding in reality, building a bridge where trust finds its place unreservedly amid deeds grounded in a vividly perceived justice, eternally crafted for collective empathy's embrace. As the precinct continued to navigate its path of reform, the community around it surged forward with newfound collaborations, mirroring those changes. Old barriers fell away, gaining momentum from fresh perspectives, and genuine partnerships now flourishing in the connection between those who served and those served. Emily and a cadre of community leaders worked tirelessly to anchor this transition, establishing bridges that had once seemed impossible. Meetings, once dominated by adversarial tones, evolved into collaborative forums, each discussion building upon previous dialogues, constructive bricks, in an ever-expanding structure of mutual respect. One such meeting, held under the expansive oak trees in the park's open-air pavilion, drew an eclectic crowd, from police officers and local business owners to educators and activists, a blend of voices now accustomed to listening as much as they spoke. This natural setting allowed conversation to flow, unhurried by formality, ideas swaying in the gentle breeze, mixing as freely as sunlight through branches. Marlon Harris stood at the podium, adept at harnessing the collective energy in spaces like these. His warm demeanor invited each participant to share not just grievances but constructive ideas. The ebb and flow of dialogue weighted with sincerity yet buoyant with optimism. This was unity in practice, an assembly reflecting the town's kaleidoscope of experiences and wisdom. Today, we're not just addressing policies, but also understanding the lived realities behind them, Marlon began. We need to create spaces where every voice influences the path we take, where our solutions are as interconnected as our lives. Around him, nods of agreement wove through the crowd, shifting into a series of animated exchanges. Ideas sparked and gained traction, from youth programs fostering empathy in schools to initiatives encouraging business leaders to engage in restorative justice practices. Hovering nearby, James, observing this dialogue, felt the warmth of empowerment alongside the urgency of continuation. He saw around him not just stakeholders, but determined architects of a community ripe for rebirth. Through such interactions, trust and accountability became the currency of relationship. This was clearly evident when Margaret Tucker approached Officer Alex, seeking clarity on a new community patrol plan aimed at building rapport with residents, an endeavor she was keen to support. Her son's experiences etched into each decision. "Alex," Margaret inquired, her voice a mix of hope and steel, "how do we ensure these new patrol engagements truly reflect the intentions of change? We need more than just presence. We need to embody the spirit of commitment." Alex, holding her gaze steady, nodded with earnest understanding. "Mrs. Tucker, it's not just about walking beats. It's about building genuine relationships. We're looking to implement regular community engagement sessions, listenings to concerns, not just noted but addressed, from core values, and to adapt actively." She offered him a slight smile, the understanding they shared extending beyond words, a pact formed through shared visions and promises not to be abandoned. It was indicative of this emergent trust, built brick by brick, in dialogues and deeds. Officer Hines, always the mentor, took to guiding these patrols herself, instilling her seasoned perspective alongside youthful enthusiasm. Her steadfast leadership was a beacon for younger officers adapting to proactive, compassionate policing. The precinct developed into a community policing model lauded for its responsiveness and true integration. One initiative, a partnership with the local school district, provided mentoring programs, assisting youth in recognizing law enforcement as allies, not adversaries. This systematic shift, a tangible gesture toward reform, resonated far beyond its scope. The changes rippled through conversations in diners, on school buses, around dinner tables, an echo of positive reinforcement solidifying its roots within everyday life. Over time, as seasons flowed into one another, the results began to manifest in measurable, though quietly profound ways. Calls for service, traditionally steeped in conflict, showed a reduction, replaced instead by mediated resolutions and warm exchanges between officers and the community members they served. An unspoken promise now bridged disparate lives, an assurance affirming that, while much remained ahead, much had already harmonized. Once abstract, now real, born from hope's emancipated augury, that ground among hope realized. The precinct transformed from emblem to leader, aiding and encouraging counterparts across regions to explore potentialities found anew within own surroundings. In this symphony composed of countless accounts, each found resonance in its notes, binding the composition robustly directed beyond tradition. As they forged paths across interwoven lives, the precinct's walls held more than bricks. They bracketed a chronicle's pulse, a narrative authored by efforts willingly harmonized, eternalized by hands enriched within, their futures intertwined purposefully beyond. At dusk, when day relented to night, vibrant sunsets vied megapixels against memory, each hue persistently tracing the sky, affirming intentions once unknown, now eternally nurtured within, eternal existence and abiding hope, realized as perpetually enlightening renewals. As the new strategies began to take hold, the precinct and community together embarked on a reflective journey, one delving into unseen currents beneath the surface of duty and trust. This introspection held a mirror to their past, while earning glimpses of their potential future, bringing sharp focus to the biases still lurking in shadows, unwelcome yet persistent. They knew these undercurrents could easily erode their progress if allowed to fester unchallenged. Gathered within the precinct, a monthly debrief set the stage for these conversations. The mood was one of serious contemplation, as Captain Warner encouraged his personnel to look inward, while the world observed the changes they had initiated. Standing at the room's heart, Warner addressed the assembled officers. "We've taken great strides recently," he acknowledged, understanding the magnitude of these movements. "But our journey isn't just about creating new systems. It's about confronting the biases within ourselves that may undermine all we strive toward." Almost palpable, a tension snagged lightly in the room's air. Each officer assessed these words, their personal experiences coalescing with professional realizations. The challenge was inherently complex. It was easier to dissect procedure than to confront internal prejudice cultivated over years of societal and institutional influence. Warner sought to first set the tone. We can't ignore the subtleties starting within us, shaping our actions. It's crucial that we each understand where presumptions bleed into our service, he asserted. Admitting they're part of us is the first step in eradicating them. Silence followed, a compact pause filled with an understanding that resounded tremendously throughout their consciousness. Understanding became the call to arms to examine themselves, recognizing places where perception skewed into judgment instead of equity and compassion. Alex observed quietly, attentive to the reactions around him. He understood the intricacies of pride and defense, how they could blur paths between righteousness and blind adherence. Yet he also understood the dedication beginning to repurpose itself within the room's shared intent, a quiet drive gathering beneath them all. Officer Hines, her wisdom seasoned yet evolving, took this moment to share her experience. "We never truly stop learning," she began, her words filled with warmth and reflective intimacy. "I've been in many hard situations, part of numerous interactions, and yes, it took time to see where my preformed assumptions might have led me astray. Her honesty floored certain doubts sheltered in silent equivocation. Here she stood, embodying the voice wrestling with its own invisibility, urging that courage to recognize such insight. We need to make the uncomfortable comfortable. Only then can real progress take root. Thompson and Rafferty exchanged glances, a silent exchange that reverberated with tacit admissions of their shared journeys. Some sheltered beneath comfortable rationales, now brought into a brighter focus. The discomfort whispered well beyond outward confession, possessing an intricacy deeply compelling in their demands for attendance. Heinz's transparency echoed among her peers, quietly inspiring others to reflect on missed opportunities for kindness, withheld empathy. Across the room, this resonance forged an unspoken solidarity, a collective determination to shatter barriers formed not solely by duty, but by personal struggles. In the days that followed, Warner actively initiated workshops focused on identifying and confronting implicit bias. Each session invited introspective dialogues on personal experiences within the community and the broader world, channeling vulnerability into growth. They explored diverse perspectives, not as external curiosities but central narratives, stories belonging integrally within their shared community fabric. As each officer began this exploration, perspectives once considered lost amid static engagement now found new definitions, inspiring fresh awareness and tangible relational understanding. With each meeting, the precinct felt an evolving energy permeating beyond its walls. Conversations became candid collaborations, with officers sharing once private struggles and newly discovered insights. These revelations, though sometimes painful, nurtured growth that would radiate through their professional and personal lives. Individuals began taking proactive steps outside official channels. Many sought mentorship, transforming procedural blind spots into opportunities for dynamic learning. Conversations around breakroom tables shifted towards shared readings or community events, showing their vulnerability to be both present and powerful within collective support. As larger precinct goals continued manifesting into actionable projects, smaller moments of connection flowered beneath consistent maturation, shaping a culture more diversified in reality and resonant as a promise shared among a society redefined. At the heart of these transformations lay a fortitude projected willingly and captured reciprocally within its essence, resilience growing not solely between opposition, but by unifying wisdom derived from genuine self-reflection. The whispering undercurrents, once overlooked and latent beneath progress, morphed into actionable pathways, sublating ignorance deftly unchallenged by craft alone. Gesture by gesture, engaged officers enacted compassion's charter, while evolving insights reharmonized coexistence's refrain. The precinct persisted, turning introspection into prowess, weaving internal strength into reform-bound, authentic, and real, a testament seeded by intentionality and harvestable ingenuity, evidenced by all who dared embrace growth. The crisp morning air carried the anticipation of a new chapter, just as James Tucker emerged from the precinct's main entrance. His stride was confident, the weight of past weeks lightened by the coherence of collective effort towards reform. What had started as his personal struggle had now transcended into a shared narrative, a testament to what could be achieved with unity and resilience. Around him, the precinct buzzed with activity, officers greeting him with nods of recognition, but also with an unspoken acknowledgement of the role he had played in challenging and changing their perspectives. These gestures, however small, signified the profound shifts in understanding and respect developing within the police force and the community they served. James paused outside, breathing deeply, taking in the scene with a sense of quiet fulfillment. He reflected on his journey, the moments of doubt and the triumphs of solidarity, and realized the power of his position as both a catalyst and a participant in this ongoing transformation. As he made his way towards an awaiting community gathering in the park, he thought of his mother, Margaret Tucker, whose strength had been a guiding force throughout. Her conviction and unparalleled resilience had been a beacon not just for James, but for an entire community seeking justice and equity. Arriving at the park, James was greeted warmly by familiar faces, their smiles bearing traces of shared struggle and unwavering hope. The gathering was a celebration, a testament to the milestones achieved, and a reminder of the paths yet to be forged. Emily Sanchez, ever the stalwart voice within the community, stood ready to address the crowd. Her presence exuded confidence and the accumulated wisdom of someone deeply entwined with the fight for justice. "Today we celebrate progress," she proclaimed, her voice clear and imbued with purpose. "But let us remember, real change occurs when we continue to push forward, lifting each other higher with every stride." Her words resonated through the assembly, drawing applause from the gathered community. Applause that was echoed in the nearby precinct, where officers listened, windows flung open to embrace the shared sounds of triumph. Whatever divisions had once existed between the people and their protectors were now bridges, constructed through empathy and intentional reform. The police, once viewed as distant enforcers, were now engaged partners in the community's story, a shift evidenced not just in words but in action. As the celebration continued, Marlon Harris took the stage, his presence gentle yet assertive, a teacher prepared to build upon these newfound foundations. "Together, we've cultivated something extraordinary," he announced, his eyes scanning the diverse faces before him. "We've witnessed the strength of our community and the power of persistence in the face of inequality." Margaret, standing close to her son, could not have been prouder. She watched as the seeds they had sown took root, stretching up towards the sky. For so long, the fight had felt solitary, yet here stood a testament to perseverance, proof that change was possible, and that justice, when pursued relentlessly, could be realized. As the day drew on, laughter and camaraderie intertwined, remarks of hope mingling with commitments to uphold the values they had fought so hard to realize. Children played freely, their joyful shouts interspersed with the conversations of adults recounting their shared journey, bearing witness to resilience harvestable across generations. In a moment of collective symbolism, the community invited representatives from the precinct to join them on stage. Officer Alex, joined by Warner and Hines, stepped forward, their presence a physical representation of partnership reborn through dedication and shared beliefs. Alex addressed the crowd with genuine humility. "Thank you for your patience, for your courage, and for your trust. These changes are just the beginning, and we commit to continuous improvement and accountability." The assemblage erupted into applause, a recognition of their commitment and acknowledgement of their mutual understanding realized through thoughtfully engaged cooperation. Emily led the final words, her voice vibrant, capturing the essence of hope and unity. "Together, we can not only envision a better future, but actively build one. Let's continue this journey, hand in hand." As the sun began its descent, painting the park in hues of gold and crimson, the ceremony turned into a mosaic of experiences, a collective embracing the twilight with promises to maintain these newly laid paths of justice and dignity. James lingered, soaking in the atmosphere, a tapestry woven with threads of past struggles and promises of future progress. This was no longer just a battle, it was a movement, and its longevity would depend upon each person's continued commitment to fairness and equity. As dusk laced its way across the horizon, time etched a silent vow to honor this legacy, to nurture it into a living, breathing monument of harmony and justice. And so, beneath that softening sky, they all departed, infused with purpose and ready to lead their community towards the light of a new dawn. As twilight settled softly over the town, a hush descended, gently wrapping the park and its community in a serene embrace. The conversations began to fade into the background, replaced by the comforting chirps of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. nature's own chorus accompanying the passage of light to shadow. James stood for a moment, absorbing the peaceful transition, deeply aware of the profound achievements made and the reverberating impacts still to unfold. Around him, the celebration dispersed slowly, people walking home with a sense of satisfaction and hope, a realization that the journey they embarked upon together had not only transformed their community, but had etched a new path forward, defined by empathy, justice, and unwavering dedication. Margaret Tucker, lingering quietly by his side, placed a hand on James's shoulder, a gesture both grounding and uplifting. Her eyes were soft with pride, the burden she had carried alone for so long now shared, lightened by the collective unity of their friends and neighbors. "You've done so much," she said, her voice a gentle reminder of the trials faced and the victories won. "But remember, James, this journey doesn't end here. It continues with each choice, every action." James nodded, taking her words to heart, each syllable entwining with his own determination to foster more inclusive and compassionate grounds where justice and equality could thrive without constraint. This was an ending, yes, but more importantly, it was a beginning, a call to persistently cultivate and nurture what they had sown together. A short distance away, Officer Alex was engaged in conversation with a few community members, their expressions reflective but content, plotting next steps and fortifying bridges that had been reforged and strengthened. The precinct's role had clearly shifted away from mere enforcement to one of collaboration and shared responsibility, an ongoing dialogue rather than a one-sided narrative. Emily stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the scene with a quiet smile of her own. Her heart was full of gratitude for the resilience displayed by everyone involved. From rally cries that became action to initiatives now embedded at the core of a reimagined society. As the sun's final glow retreated below the horizon, casting the amphitheater in twilight's embrace, the silhouettes of determined figures gradually began to disperse, weaving stories vivid and thought-provoking into a night of serenity. Now, under a canopy of stars, James felt a sense of quiet resolve, each twinkling light above a reminder of the steadfast guidance he and they would need to navigate the challenges still looming just beyond tomorrow's dawn. The whispering night reminded him, as surely as breath does each living creature, where ill winds once blew hostile, now resides warmth wrapped newly into action. Born prophecy prevailing beyond foresight alone, encouraged to unite humanity's sacred symbolic transitions. James inhaled deeply, as if drawing strength from the canvas of stars above, and exhaled slowly, committing himself to carry the torch not simply as a representative, but as a custodian of the change embedded into rich narrative arcs, confirming time's eternal renewal. Even as the celebration faded into night, the foundations they had laid remained, casting shadows steeped in courage and determination, an enduring echo of justice pursued with passion, courage, and unyielding perseverance. It was a new beginning, but also a promise that for every step taken, another would be forged by the community. As the last murmurs of conversation faded into the still night, the promise was felt deeply by all, to transform not just through grand gestures, but through everyday kindness and understanding, a pledge to continue the journey toward a world where justice wasn't merely a destination, but a consistent reality molded by collective hope. As the park lay quiet under the watchful sky, this evolving legacy stood tall, a testament to resilience, unity, and the profound belief that, together, they were more than the sum of their parts. With one last glance at the night sky, James turned to join the remaining figures walking hand in hand into the night, leaving behind footprints on paths brightly forged, resonating with whispered truths carried forward, a testament lighted upon humanity's potential, bound, infinitely renewed.